Welcome, everyone, to We Are All Agents, a podcast and conversation series by Brave, where we talk about talent and technology and how we can help them work better together. We are very excited to be here with you and Richard Williams and Josh Craver.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Williams. Richard has 30+ years of experience working for countries and companies that have been in business for over 100 years, like Western Union and American Express. He's got extensive global experience and has lived and worked in Mexico, the UK, Malaysia, Dubai, and the US. Richard is commercial, he's customer focused, and he has led many large scale transformations. Today we're talking about transformations. We're in the midst of a big one with AI. And so we're going to talk to Richard and listen to his stories about how he's led transformations and really glean some knowledge about how we can leverage that for what we have in front of us. I had the opportunity to work with Richard for 5 years at Western Union, and I really appreciate how he doubles down on the investment in people. He sees talent as a key accelerator for business success and organizational transformations. Richard, thank you for joining us on the We Are All Agents podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation for you and Abanga. I think after that introduction, Josh, we can just go to questions.
There we go.
Said everything and anything. Richard, one of the conversations that we've been having over time is just thinking about how Western Union and your previous company, AMEX, have been sustaining for so long. And often it comes up working with mature or sort of longstanding companies that they struggle to adapt and respond to change. Yet by their very existence for that time, clearly they are adapting to change. So we're just curious to hear from you. If your business is working well, you're in a mature industry, things are looking stable, your business model is succeeding, how do you decide how to respond to changes in the marketplace? There's changes every year. Now we have a big one around AI. How should we be thinking about that for those of us working in sort of stable, mature businesses?
I think you made a good point there, Abanga. The fact that those companies, and there's quite a few other companies that have been in business for so long, would tell you that they've had to do something to adapt and change over that time, even though in the moment it may not seem like it. I think that's embedded in those companies. And I think as it comes to AI, and as we all need to look at it, I don't think it's a response to AI. I think we've all got to think about embracing AI. And AI really needs to be part of a digital strategy and something that can help improve the way we work, how we perform, and how we service better, right? I think if we go into it with that mindset, it will actually help enable and embrace AI. I don't think, there's a lot of talk about AI is going to replace all the jobs in the near term. I don't think that's a reality. I think for AI to work well, there's lots of things that need to be done to enable AI to truly work effectively. So I think that part of the discussion, which may prevent companies from moving quickly, at least to me, is a non-starter in the short term.
It's an interesting point. And I think as we evolve and we think about the adoption of AI, and right now we're definitely in a hype cycle. People are AI is everywhere. But when we think about the practicality of using it now and being somewhat of an early adopter, but also a little bit cautiously optimistic, I know our experience we have with Workday, for example, was one that maybe you can talk about.
Yeah, I agree. And if you looked, if you looked back into some of the cloud technologies emerged, and that may or may not be on the same scale as AI, but I think it's a good starting point to at least start thinking about AI. And you know this, Josh, when we were an early adopter of Workday, and if you looked back, whatever, 15-ish years ago, there were very few Workday practitioners, right? There was a few kicking about, and people were starting to understand the system, and people, I think, just did it in their spare time, right? Learned, and it was another system implementation. But I think if you fast forward today, and I've had the opportunity to go to like a Workday Rising or even see organizations, and you just need to look online. You look at the practitioners today, Workday practitioners, it's quite astounding. And there are literally many new roles that have been created through this new technology. Now, there are some roles that have gone away, but I would argue those are more the routine roles that would have been robots. Could have taken some of them over a period of time, but roles have continued to be created by that new technology. And if you go even further back, right, even before that, I can remember, probably many on this call don't remember, but when there was a transition from dumb terminals, right, so mainframe dumb terminals where you could only input into boxes and then it would spit out whatever it was programmed to spit out. There was a big transition to PCs, and that was the same sort of thing. There was a lot of concern of angst, and it actually made people better at their jobs. It made a much better customer experience for sure, and enabled growth within individuals and created a whole bunch of new jobs, right? That had those skills. So I think we've got to look at this as something like that. There's an opportunity here. There will be some job creation, and some roles will go away. But I think that's part of the evolution that's happened with any big technology transformation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How much you had a follow up, Josh?
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say that I remember building the business case for the Workday implementation, and going through the whole process of looking at the return on the investment, and the investment was significant. And when I look at AI and what's happening, partnership and collaboration across the organizations, in this case, the corporate functions, is really important. We had a great partner in our CIO and the technology team, and David Thompson, and he was really a champion for us getting that business case approved and partnering with us for a successful implementation. Any thoughts there on just leadership and collaboration in times of digital transformation and change?
Yeah, I think collaboration, 100%, right? If you're going on some of these transformations or new technologies on your own, it is really hard, because in organizations today, the organizations work as one, right? So all of the intricacies of the organization, even if you've got a standalone system, most of them are all connecting to each other. And quite frankly, they're all connecting to the organization. So the people of the organization, and then, secondary to the customers too. So I think having a partner and driving forward against a business case, and also not so much a business. I mean, the business case was important. It was more the vision of where we needed to go from a digital standpoint and how we needed to support the digital standpoint, the digital vision of the organization for all of the people, right? So there was a piece of, yeah, there was a business case, which are the financials, which were important, but there was the other piece of how are we creating a new digital culture in the company, and that was one of the ways to do it that would impact every employee in the organization. And I think that's in the partnership was probably the driving force with David and I.
That is really interesting. What just kind of a little anecdote. One of the board leaders that I've been listening to recently was saying that on a lot of his boards, CEOs are advocating for budget to do research and development into AI without a business case. They're sort of rushing into it without having a clear story of what the value is. And I think you just hit the nail on the head there. It isn't only the financial ROI that you need to describe, but the vision of the organization and where it's going in general and where it's going around digital. That's super powerful. And that seems to be missing in people's rushing after AI. Instead of figuring out the business strategy and vision and then the right technology to drive that, they're looking at this technology as something that they need to do and trying to figure out what use it might have. I'm just curious from an HR perspective, what should our role be in creating that vision for the organization around technology or future of work? How
Well,
do we fit in?
I think it's an interesting point, Banga. And I saw, as you said, that there was a study yesterday, or this week at least, that was released by Gartner. And one of the things it said was 3/4 of the CEOs that they had surveyed, and it was a pretty big sample, 3/4 of those CEOs had used ChatGPT in the first half of the year, and something like 40-something% had actually used it in their jobs. So I think there's a little bit of a difference with other technology transformations, that people are starting to experience and play around where maybe that wouldn't have been the case in the past, which is creating exactly what you discussed. And I think it's okay to experiment and start to understand the capabilities, and I think that's good for the organization. But that over time becomes very expensive if there's no vision. And as I said before, I think for it to really work well, AI has to be part of the broader digital strategy. It can't kind of be the AI strategy. And
Right.
and that digital strategy obviously has to be part of the business strategy of how you're going to serve your customers better going forward, and how you're going to make the organization function more optimally in the future. So I think it's my perspective okay to experiment a little bit, but you know, if you keep doing that, you're going to find you've got lots of experiments costing lots of money, and no one's aligned to the common vision. And I think the other thing I've learned about AI, AI learns, but it's really important that AI is connected, right? Because you've got all these AI agents that are working potentially all over an organization. They've got to be connected, right? Otherwise, you're not going to have a consistent delivery of what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
Interesting. It reminds me of some work that I did when I was at HSBC, and we were looking at an HR transformation, and we were doing an audit of all of the systems, and big bank, over 300,000 employees global, and I remember at the time there were like over 150 learning management systems, right? There was like 6,500 learning objects. And that's what happens when you don't have a strategy, a vision, and standardization. So we're in this
Yeah.
we're in this change cycle where it is good for people to experiment. But what I'm really gleaning from what you said, Richard and Abanga, is that you do need a strategy. You do need some principles to scale and make it cost efficient and productive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with that strategy and the vision, it also helps you, focus. Because the other thing as an organization, most organizations don't have endless investment dollars, so it's really where do you focus to actually start to create some momentum against your vision and your strategy. And I think that that process actually helps the organization better understand. It also makes it much more effective as you implement, and you also learn and fail right in a more controlled environment.
Absolutely. So I mentioned in my intro of you that you're extremely commercial, customer focused, and you look at the business first, and then you translate the strategy into HR's role. So I'm asking you to put on your head of HR hat right now, and so what is the role of HR? How do we in HR look at AI, make sure that we're aligned to the business strategy, but also create an employee experience that leverages this technology? What are your thoughts on HR and its role in the AI evolution?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think the HR function in many cases are kind of the guardians or the shepherds of the culture, right? So I think in that context, I think there's an enormous opportunity for HR or the people functions to really help with the broader transformation and change strategy. Because this is, however we look at it, this is going to be a large change. It may already be a large change across many organizations. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for the function to really help the organization through the transformation and change. And part of that transform, I don't think there's lots and lots of literature on effective change management. I think those principles can be applied to this. Maybe a little tweaking, but for the most part, they can be just aligned to it, because this is another, massive change for organizations. And so I think that change and transformation is one. I think the other thing, if you look at the function itself, I think there's an enormous opportunity for the function to actually leverage some of the AI technologies across, whether it's learning, recruiting, employee experience. I think there's probably almost 100, maybe hundreds of AI applications or solutions out there in the marketplace today. So I think there's an opportunity to start to prioritize and say, what are those that can help us as a function be more effective and helping our people deliver better to our customers. Um, But I think that the other challenge is how do you connect and make all these AI components work together? And I think that's the transformation for an organization and for the HR function, because it's back to our earlier point. The organization is going to have to work together on all of this. It can't all happen in isolation. That certainly from my perspective, it's got to be looked at. This is a transformation and a change of how the organization is going to work, how the organization is going to serve its customers better. So this integrated view is really important, and I think HR can help drive that, because part of that is teamwork, part of that is collaboration, part of that is just having those conversations, with people to understand what they're doing, or facilitating those conversations.
There's a lot to dig into in what you said.
Yeah.
I have several follow-ups, but I just want to hit on one from the audience, and then we may talk about a couple of others. For example, I want to dig into the sort of change story, how you bring the company along, especially when not everyone may be on board with change, or most of the time they're not. But before we get to that, just a quick one. You said or you said just in passing that there's almost certainly hundreds of AI technologies that you could adopt. So I know right now you're advising an AI startup, so you kind of see things from a vendor perspective through them. And then you also have been a buyer over the years of many different types of technologies and making decisions about which ones make sense and which ones don't. Can you just give us some perspective about decision making, prioritization, and having those technologies work together? How does an organization, pick the right tech stack, and what advice would you give to new players building new products entering that mix?
Yeah, well, from a technical standpoint, I'm probably not the right person to ask, but let me take a stab at it.
From a buyer, from a user, from a
Yeah, I,
someone who
I think
understands
I
how to
think it's back
market.
to really understanding the strategy and the prioritization of that strategy, and then looking at the applications that can help deliver it. But I was on a call yesterday with the CEO of Taltrix, who I've been working with for probably a year now. And I think the one interesting point he was making is that, for AI really to work, you've got to find ways to best integrate AI agents. So all these different AI systems, effectively, how do you get them to integrate and learn from each other? And then there's a huge piece around, how do you protect privacy and data, right, within those environments. So I think if you're a buyer of it, it's understanding the capabilities, prioritizing, and then you need to bring some of these systems in and build them, but know that you've got to create a more integrated approach, right? I think it just can't be standalone, because I think if it's all standalone, you get to what Josh just described, right? Lots of different systems, and my guess is it'll all be great until it's not, right? Which is and then when something's not talking to each other, or it's not integrating, or it's doing something different or contradicting, I think that's where the bigger issue is going to be. So I think, for any organization, it's really the strategy and prioritizing against the focus of that strategy.
It's really interesting. I mean, you see this a lot in startups where, you know, they're in a hyper growth cycle, and people are buying a lot of tech for what they need, and the growth cycle kind of flattens a little bit, and then it's time to potentially IPO and clean things up. And all the leaders look at the tech stack and they say, "How do we have 150 applications and a run rate budget of $3 million?" And it's because it was kind of just go out there, buy what you want for what you need, and not looking at a more holistic strategy. So really good points there.
Yeah. Does that clarify, or is there something I missed on that?
I do think it is helpful. It's just it's a tricky situation right now where we're overwhelmed. Just as HR practitioners, we're overwhelmed with a number of different technologies, uncertain about how well they do what they do, and how important any of those features are to driving our business. So we're tasked with speculating on how to update how HR works, and then going out and searching for technologies that may or may not be effective at doing those tasks. And they probably don't work together because they're all new. So we need to integrate them together over time. It can be quite overwhelming for practitioners trying to solve this problem.
I do think there's an enormous opportunity to learn. I mean, some of these new technologies, particular in the people or HR space, are quite incredible on
Yeah.
the capabilities they have. Now, some of them can do it at scale, some of them are proving that out. But I think for anyone, just exploring some of those, and even if it's just looking at some of their videos online explaining the functionality or what the product they have does, I think getting a broad learning and understanding of what is in the marketplace, because these companies are obviously trying to sell their products, and most of them are pretty pretty incredible and game changing. So I think it is worth spending the time. You don't have to call each company; they've all got all of their information in the public domain because they're obviously trying to push their product into many companies. So I think there's a huge learning opportunity just to understand. It may only be at a macro level some of these capabilities, which will help inform any strategy and then focus or implementation plan within that strategy.
There does seem to be a change in mindset required as a practitioner from I'm building programs to help people to I'm managing people through products and technology.
Yeah.
And I'm either building or shaping those tools to deliver the experience or value that I need to create for employees. And then if you're Richard, for customers as well.
Yeah.
So I don't
But I
know.
think I think there's also a piece, certainly in the function, and this has happened many times over the last 10 years at least. There with some of these technologies, there's also huge potential to improve the delivery of the people function, right? And what they can bring to the business to help them to deliver to their customers, and how that they can use the technology to better align with the business, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for HR to actually get better at what we do by embracing some of these technologies, especially AI, right? Because I think it actually can make all of us that much better at our jobs and actually create a kind of new level of performance, or the next level of performance in our roles by kind of embracing them and using them. That doesn't mean you're just deploying them to do your job. I think it's helping people actually deliver more value within their own job or function.
Can you talk about how that's happened to you in the past? I know you mentioned I think it was AMEX, you brought in the first PC and sort of changed how you did analytics. Am I getting that story right? Can you just tell us
Well,
a
yeah,
little
there's probably two examples. I mean, the Amex one is, well, probably 30 years ago at least. So, but I wasn't in an HR function there. I was in an operations function, and we, as I mentioned before, we worked with dumb terminals. So, you could type in to certain boxes, but it was on a mainframe, and if you need to do a customer correspondence, you had a choice of these five based on whatever situation. But those, you can imagine, there's very little flexibility, and no, yeah, 80% of the situations may have fit into those five categories. But when the system was slow, you had to wait, to do your work. And as we moved to kind of PC technology, it was actually bringing that into the PC, and you could actually use things like Word and other things to adjust the letter. So it was very simple, but it had a huge impact on the productivity of the team, and I think people's self-worth and how they delivered and serviced the customers, because they could, within, obviously there was guidelines, but within reason, provide a little bit extra in whatever they were responding to from a customer perspective. It because it worked on a desktop environment, you didn't have these issues. The system was slow, the system going down, and from a customer perspective, obviously it was a much better output because it was less standardized. But it was a challenge, right? We had to do a business case to get our first one, and we could also run analytics, um, which really helped our little department understand where our volumes were and track our volumes a little bit better. So I think that's one. I think the second one would be, as we implemented Workday and we went through all of the modules and had a 5-year technology plan, I think if you fast forwarded, 5 years into that and looked at the analytics that we were able to get by having all of our modules and our core data in Workday, it was incredible, right? I mean, we had dashboards on our screens, that were real time of our workforce globally, and I think that made a huge difference in how we made decisions. It also made a huge difference in how we could react to the business to help give them context to what was happening from a people perspective in the organization. And in some cases, it really helped us from, a compliance perspective where we had to meet, specific compliance requirements. We had all the information in one place and were able to deliver that to regulators, around the globe. So I think that was an example of it really did accelerate and make people better and make the function better in what they delivered. I'll explain to you what a dumb terminal was, Josh, later.
No worries, no worries. So Richard, we asked you to come on for many, many reasons. I mentioned in the introduction, working for Amex for a long time, working for Western Union, as the head of HR there and different roles. And you have led and been a part of many, many transformations. And we do want to hear some of the lessons you've learned and how we can apply those to where we are today in the AI transformation. So anything you want to share on what we can learn from your experiences and the transformations you've been a part of as we step into this AI transformation that we're all a part of now?
Yeah, so I think just a few thoughts. I mean, I think with both of the organizations that you mentioned, they've been in business, both of them, for 170 years plus. And I think one thing that was clear and part of their DNA is that they weren't afraid of transformation. It may in the moment always seem daunting and hard, but that as an organization, I don't think they were ever afraid to think about, talk about, and then execute on transforming. It was kind of embedded in their DNA, I think. And then it was always customer inspired, right? So there was a customer piece that really helped inspire those transformations for the broader organization. So I think that's first point. And then I think from a large scale transformation perspective, there's probably 4 or 5 things that, I would say top of mind. One, it started at the top. So uh, it was very important that leaders or the most senior leader uh, is a supporter, a proponent, a champion of the transformation. Because if people don't look up the organization and see buy-in and energy going towards it, it's very hard to align behind it. So the leaders need to understand and articulate the need for change and the vision for the transformation. I think that sounds simple, but it's not as simple. And going back 30 years, we use things like the burning platform to really inspire an organization. Fast forward today, it's more around talking, how do we talk about change stories? But they're the same sort of thing. It's about leaders buying in and helping the organization. Um, I think the other thing, it can't be the change and transformation. It can't be seen as kind of a one-off event, like a project. It's got to be seen and communicated as a new way of working and of learning. Um, and at the end of the day, it's a transformation. So a transformation should change how you work going forward, not just in the moment, right? So I think, and that's the same message for AI, where there's no going back, right? We've got to go forward, and this is going to change the way we work as an organization. Secondly, there was an education to enable the broader organization. So I think thinking through communication tools, training, all help accelerate the change, and really help leaders and contributors embrace the change, right? So I think if you help people and give them the tools and the training, they're more likely to kind of at least put their toe in the water to say, well, maybe I should try this change or put some energy towards it. One of the other things that I've seen multiple times through large transformation is dedicated support. Um, and that's under this tagline, it driving a transformation. While it is part of everyone's job, it can't be everyone's job, right? So you do need a core team that's dedicated to kind of shepherding supporting the organization through the transformation, and quite frankly, keeping it simple and keeping it on focus to wherever you're going. So it's made a big difference in, I can think of at least 4 transformations I've been part of where there was a core team, and it was their job 24 hours a day to worry about the transformation, its progress, how they were enabling the organization, understanding where there were potentially roadblocks or challenges or barriers that needed to be, addressed within the organization, but also how they could accelerate, right? And pushing the organization to accelerate from their perspective. So I think it's important to give, have some people that are really, that is their job. And part of their job would also be, measuring progress. I think that's critical. You've got to measure progress, having 2 to 3 key metrics and, measuring against the outcomes of those metrics, critical. And then I think last one, which that team can really help embrace and shepherd in the organization, is celebrating. And many times in transformations, I've seen everyone waits for the transformation to happen, which is 2 years away or 1 year away, and they kind of miss all the transformations all the little transformation that's happened to get to, the longer term outcomes. So it's celebrating the big wins, but also more importantly, celebrating the small wins across the organization, and within that, celebrating and rewarding behavior change. Because most transformations are about people changing behaviors. Now, maybe they're applying AI or a new system, or they're doing a new way of working. But all of that, is about behavior change. And early on, if you can reward some of that behavior change, people take notice of that and momentum. So I think, if I were to look back at some of the larger scale transformation, I think those 4 or 5 points are probably the ones I would take away from making a transformation successful.
That's great. I love those points, and they're pressure tested, as I can
Yeah, for sure.
attest to. And I want to bring up a couple things that I think will give people a little bit more context on those points. So that framework and model, the 5 points you have used, and I've been a part of those changes. And one of the most impressive things in my career that I was a part of is when we were working with a big 5 consulting firm to help us with the transformation, and it became really clear based on our experiences that sometimes they build a strategy and then you're left with the implementation and the execution, and those types of engagements oftentimes fail because you don't have those dedicated support and resources. So you actually stepped out of your day job and your yay job as the head of HR and did a great developmental succession play for someone else to take the interim role, and you pulled hypos out of their day jobs and created a core team of, I believe, 10 or 12 folks to run these work streams. And those dedicated resources were critical from my perspective in driving an impressive amount of operational cost savings and also benefits to the top line. So I'm sharing that just because that's one example of dedicated support. Anything you'd add on that play?
Well, I think in that one, I think one important thing is, there's some courage that's involved in that, because the CEO, as you know, Hikmet, he had to make the call to pull, I think it was 10, 11 high potential senior people out of their roles for 18 months to 2 years. And that's a pretty courageous thing to do when you're also trying to run a business and deliver to your customers and deliver to your shareholders, right? And keep the organization. So it's a pretty bold move. And it's also, and he did all of the calls personally with me to ask people to do that, to step up to do that. So that's an example of, kind of the tone from the top and starting at the top of the organization. He set that very early on in the cycle of that transformation. So I think that courage is also important. And you're going to make mistakes, that's for sure. But I've always said it's how quickly you correct your mistakes. It's not whether you make them or not, right? Or learn from your mistakes is really important. But I think that is a good example of when a team can come together and they were shepherding the work. I don't think anyone would say that, they individually delivered the work. They really helped the organization deliver. And I think that was probably the success of that all of that change was they were enabling the organization to transform, not to forcing the organization to transform.
Yeah. Wow.
So it actually, if you fast forwarded 4 years, that way of working remained in the organization even after those people had gone into their next roles.
Hmm.
The sustainability was there. And
Yeah.
another one I want to click on is the change story, Richard. And so you said earlier, a lot of this is easier said than done, and all the change management frameworks are out there. And yeah, we've heard a million times that you got to do these things, but um, where people fall down is actually walking the talk, right? And doing them and doing them well. And so, as part of this transformation that we were just talking about, there was a significant investment in leaders doing change stories that allowed them to have a framework, but also personalize them so they could then go back and share those change stories with their teams to get buy-in, to help educate, to really lead and drive this change. So, can you talk a little bit more about the change story, that example, and how these change stories really come to life and why they matter?
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. I think the change story was an integral part of helping drive and drive transformation and getting leaders to really help be the ambassadors of the transformation and quite frankly help their teams better understand the transformation. So for me, a change story is kind of this compelling personal narrative, right, on the need for change and inspiring, the view of the future. And I also think it really helps you individually internalize and start to visualize the change. If you start having to do it for yourself and write, and it was a written document. So everyone had to write no bullet points. It was, kind of write an essay about your change story and then, take it to your organization. Firstly, the leaders, we all shared it with each other. So we had over 100 leaders that actually created these change stories to start with. And I think from that, it going into any transformation or large change, you've got your always groups of individuals. You got people, that are ready to go and they wrote their change story before they walked in the door. And then you've got kind of this whole big group in the middle that's just needs some direction, and some tools to help do it. And then you've got, a group that says, I don't know why I'm doing this. It's a waste of time. I don't want to do it, you know. And I think by coming together to write a change story and giving people tools, it kind of brings that whole group together and makes people think about the change for themselves,
Yeah.
and how they're going to engage others. And interestingly, as we went through and everyone wrote these, they were also very personal, right? People talked personally about the organization and their commitment to the organization, and in some cases, some examples of past successes or failures. And I think that really helped people personalize it, make it real, but also think through how they were going to talk to their organizations about it. And it really was a motivator because it kind of cut across priorities, personality types, and roles. And it was really about individuals and how they were going to engage in this change within the organization and on an individual level. Now, obviously, everyone was collectively aligned to the same top line goals, but this was really at an individual level. So I think, having writing a change story, even if you just write it for yourself, it really does help you think about the whys of the change, and then also how you need to go about it is incredibly important. So I think seems such a simple tool, but it's a very powerful tool on an individual level and on a group level, especially as people start to share them.
I didn't realize that you meant literal stories that people wrote.
Yeah, people literally put pen to paper and wrote them and reiterated. I mean, there was obviously some high level guidelines that we used relative to the transformation and some of the goals, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there was probably a 2-page guide, and then we did it together and came together and worked as groups to really, iterate and make it better and get input before we used that to go to organization. And most of us took it and read it to our organizations and sent it afterwards, but read it because I think that made it real, right? And as I
Yeah.
said, some of them were very, very personal in talking about how an individual goes through change, which I think connected the organization to better understand, how they needed to react.
That seems both emotionally powerful and also motivating, engaging for people. So
Richard,
yeah, super interesting.
I was
Yeah, sorry.
on the other side of the spectrum of this, because that was a very inclusive, collaborative, personalized approach with some strategic guardrails about, what the organization was doing and where it was going. Yeah, I remember the story of a different approach when you were working in Dubai, where the organization was going through a massive change based on the markets and what was happening, and there was a very clear vision and strategy of where the organization was going. And the leader at that time, the CEO, said, this you either in or out. And that was a little bit more directive, but also really reinforces this point of when there is vision and when there is strategy, you can paint that picture and let people opt in or out. Can you just talk about what happened in Dubai and that leadership?
Yeah, well, I was part of an organization, and for the most part, it was a startup organization. I mean, we had a big portfolio, but we were operating as a startup. And I think, like everyone else, the financial crisis came, right? That was whatever 2008-ish, right? Financial crisis came. We were at a huge growth trajectory and ambitions, and certainly the foundation was in place. And then this financial crisis came, and the CEO of the organization came out and said, listen, we all believe in our strategy, we all believe in what we need to deliver, but we've been hit by this unexpected situation, which, as we all know, was impacting everyone. You essentially couldn't hide for it. She essentially asked the organization, listen, as senior leaders, we're all gonna make a short-term sacrifice, which was, reducing our pay. And in most of the countries we operated, that had to be voluntary. You could not be forced upon you without other, legal negotiations, and asked the senior leaders of the organization to reduce their pay to really help sustain the investments and to keep the resources intact so we could accelerate out of the crisis. And no one needed to do it because we all individually needed to sign a letter to volunteer to do it, but everyone did it because everyone believed in kind of the goal and believed in the potential, which is also important because the story was there, right? We all believed in the potential. So it was just for me, it was very interesting in the fact that people kind of signed up so quickly, and everyone was obviously doing their own personal sacrifice and doing that, right? And it was a time of great uncertainty, so it was even harder, right? When you know all those uncertainties around you. But fast forward, and it's back to the reward piece. The promise was, as we accelerate out, we're going to reward you over and above your sacrifice, right? And that happened because we were able to accelerate out and kind of achieve the goals. So I think it was it was a great example to me of people coming together to make that short-term sacrifice, knowing that there's payoff in the longer term, and not just individually, but for all of your people and for your customer bases and for the business as an entity.
Mhm. That's amazing. Now's the time for questions. If the audience has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll get to them in the last 15 minutes here. While people are thinking of questions, or in case people don't have questions, I wanted to ask about a little bit of I guess, doubling down on Change Story a little bit, but maybe you can give us a little bit more of a insight into tactically how to get it done across the organization. Western Union, moving money by mail, now moving money by mobile. It's been a huge transformation over many years, with a huge period of time there where retail was the main focus. And I'm just curious to hear from you, from a change response to technology process. How did you and HR role or other leaders in the organization work together to convince people to adapt and update the organization? And if you look at how Western Union invests now, you could argue it's mostly a tech company. I mean, there's huge technology teams and lots of innovation going on with AI, has been for the last 10 years. So there's quite a lot going on the tech side, but that wasn't always the case. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about how that was achieved. A lot
Well,
of
I think
people fear becoming Kodak and Blockbuster. And
yeah,
Western Union has, yeah.
I think if you look back, a couple of principles that happened, if you look back over time, one, I think from an HR standpoint, it was about understanding the business strategy and putting the tools in place to make sure we could help enable that business strategy. So I think that was first and foremost. Secondly, on the side, and I would argue this, as the organization was digitizing, if you go back to our technology strategy, it was all about digitizing. We moved to the cloud. We were one of the first functions in the organization to move to the cloud.
Mhm.
Uh, and with our CIO partner David, that it was sending a message to the organization that the cloud was something that would better enable the business. It wasn't some scary thing, because
Mhm.
lots of people were scared of the cloud in those days. So we were one of the first to move, so that it was kind of helping set an example, and I would argue probably a more low risk example. As long as we could protect our people data, that we weren't gonna, lose all of our customers tomorrow morning, right, by doing
Mhm.
that. So
I
it
like
was a
that,
good,
HR leading by example. Then you could
yeah. So
argue.
it was a good example organization. Now we certainly had benefits for the function, no doubt, and that that was a focus too. But I think it helped the organization. I think as digital grew in the organizations, a couple things. One, digital was incubated. So there was a digital team created, actually a whole new office and organization created in San Francisco, in the middle of the capabilities and the ecosystem. And they were given the tools to grow. And from an HR function, we provided those tools. And sometimes those were a little bit different from what we were doing across the rest of the organization. But they were able to accelerate. They brought in new technologies. We brought, people that were able to execute against those technologies, and leaders that were, had operated in this ecosystem. So it really digit and created an environment like the work environments in those days that were similar to other work environments of kind of digital organizations. So that happened. Now, if you fast forward, a lot of that digitization, those learnings started to spill back into the core part of the organization, right? The more traditional retail business. So even that, business was enabled by the digital business, where they were able to start to digitize some of their apps, and how they went to market, and also with their broader agent base, encouraging them to be, operating in a more digitized way, getting away from paper and things like that. So I think there
Mhm.
was for the, I don't, I mean, it's probably, you've said it, and I'll use the term brick and mortar as a descriptor. I don't think it isn't necessarily brick and mortar, but I think as long as you can funnel the learnings back to the rest of the organization, sometimes create a little bit competition so people do look across, to see what's happening. I think you can really enable that digital, mindset in the rest of the organization.
That's interesting. I mean, the obvious answer would be part of what you said, which is find leaders with a vision for the future, tech savviness, put them in place to update different parts of the organization. But what you said preceded that was HR looked at itself and said, how can we be cutting edge, adopted the technology? In this case, it would be go out, figure out how HR can adopt AI and demonstrate that it can add value, and then help people adopt it with the empathy of having actually done it
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, I think, and some of it was we were willing to make that early move because we saw benefit for us as a function too, right?
Yeah.
We had lots of other. I mean, Josh described one situation. We had 50 systems. I think it wasn't the scale that Josh described earlier. That really we were spending a lot of time trying to make them work together, and it wasn't working well. So there was an opportunist part of this to get functionality for our function to help be better at what we did every day, and kind of jump on the coattails of what the technology organization was trying to do. So sometimes you have to leverage those opportunities, right, to accelerate within the own function or accelerate within.
It's really a great example of the incubation process that a lot of startups use, but the example of bringing dedicated resources in to focus on transformation. In this case, building out a digital strategy and incubating the products and services in San Francisco. Two solid examples of really focus and prioritization and creating a space and a place for that and resources. And I think that's what we've started to see, and we'll probably see more of with progressive organizations where they are building, AI labs, so to speak, where people can practice and play and experiment and test and learn, and then bring that out to the rest of the organization. So those stories are really valuable for, I think, what's happening, what is to come in terms of next practice.
Yeah, but I think, and you push this, Josh. You got to make sure everyone's learning along that trip, right? You can't just be that the group that's got AI now that they're the only ones learning. We've really got to encourage, the learning across organizations, because at the end of the day, AI is going to creep across the organization. And as I said before, I think it's an enormous opportunity for all of us individually to be better at what we do. So the more that we're able to share and bring the organization along is even better. And I think, encouraging people to be somewhat curious, because I do think, AI is going to be one of those things, like other things were in the past, that are going to be skills that are relevant for future employability and growth. That's just going to start to happen. So I think encouraging people to have that curiosity is important too.
Thank you. I'm taking away a few things. Maybe, Josh, you have your own takeaways. Let's see. So sponsorship at the top, making sure that you have leaders with a clear point of view, having a change story that's personal. So making it personal, or finding your own personal way of interpreting the bigger change story of the organization and turning that into a larger story that everyone can buy into and also put themselves into. Celebrate wins, big and small. So don't just wait till the end. Celebrate wins along the way. Focus on the customer. Have a customer need and a customer reason for going about the transformation or technology adoption. And related to that, lead by example. When there is a real reason for doing it, make the case and try to, as an HR leader, lead by example to demonstrate to people what the value can look like when it's implemented. Josh, did you have any other takeaways coming out you want to mention?
A few. One, the point that you made, Richard, about the CEO Hickman Ursad at Western Union, just courageous leadership, right? And in Dubai as well, just like, what do you stand for as a leader, and what are you willing to put on the line? Those were risky moves by both those leaders, and they paid off in those cases. Sometimes they don't pay off, but like the courage to do that is really important. And I think that the strategy and being really intentional about trying to create a strategy, get buy-in, all the principles that you talked about of how to do that. That strategic focus and that vision is critical to help people follow and know where they're going. So very, very powerful points, Richard. Your wealth of experience in terms of transformation and really translating that into the here and now has been fruitful for us and the audience. We appreciate you joining. Any final words or thoughts you'd like to share before we close?
Thanks for the conversation. I mean, the conversation we've been talking, over the last couple of months about this and many other things. I've appreciated that, and if there's other insights that people that are listening to this have, then I think it would be great for them to share it with all of us, because I think we can all learn through this journey and help make each other better at getting through the journey and driving much better outcomes. And then I think the other critical piece is with AI is we've got to embrace it. And for myself as an HR practitioner, it's really important for all of us to embrace AI and better understand it, because I think it'll make it that much better as we serve the businesses aligned to their strategies, and then ultimately serve the customers of the business.
Thanks so much for joining, Richard, and thanks so much for watching the We Are All Agents podcast. We look forward to talking to you again soon. We have several more folks coming up in the next month or so, and we'll announce that very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.